I received a phone call from a stranger that made my hands go cold. The voice on the other end belonged to the previous owner, the woman who had sold us the house and disappeared from our lives. But her first words were not congratulations. They were a warning. "Don't tell your husband I called. Come alone." I stared at my phone, wondering what kind of secret could be so dangerous that my husband couldn't know. I thought buying that house was the beginning of a new chapter. I never imagined it would uncover a truth someone had spent years hiding. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a marketing designer in Austin, Texas. For most of my adult life, I believed that buying a home was the ultimate symbol of stability. It meant you had finally built something that belonged to you, a place where memories could grow, where Sunday mornings felt peaceful, and where you could look around and say, "We made it." For my husband Daniel and me, that dream took almost 6 years to achieve. We skipped vacations. We saved every extra dollar. We learned to live with old furniture and tiny compromises because we were working towards something bigger. So when we finally found the perfect house on a quiet street surrounded by tall trees, we felt like life was finally rewarding us. The house had everything we wanted. A bright kitchen with large windows, a backyard big enough for future family gatherings, and a small office space where I could work. It wasn't a mansion, but to us it felt like a castle. The previous owner was a woman named Rebecca. She was polite, but there was something unusual about her during the final walkthrough. She kept running her fingers along the walls and looking around the rooms like she was saying goodbye to something much more important than a house. Before leaving, she smiled at me and said, "Take care of this place. It holds a lot of memories." At the time, I thought she was just emotional about moving away. But now, when I think back, I remember the way she paused before walking out the door. Like she wanted to say something else but decided against it. 7 days after we moved in, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen counter drinking my morning coffee when my phone started ringing. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. And the moment I heard Rebecca's trembling voice, my entire body went still. "Emily, you need to listen carefully," she whispered. Then she said the words that made my coffee slip from my hand. "Don't tell your husband I called. Come alone." For several minutes after Rebecca ended the call, I just sat there staring at my phone. Her words kept replaying in my mind. "Don't tell your husband I called. Come alone." I didn't know what scared me more, the warning itself or the fact that she specifically mentioned Daniel. My first instinct was to walk into the living room and tell him everything. Daniel had always been the person I trusted most. He was the man who stood beside me through every difficult year, the person who held my hand when we signed the papers for our first home. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of overreacting. Maybe it was the strange feeling that Rebecca sounded genuinely afraid. So instead of telling Daniel, I called Rebecca back. She answered almost immediately. "Thank you for calling me back," she said quietly. I asked her what this was about, but she refused to explain over the phone. She only said, "Please, Emily, just meet me once. After that, you can decide what you want to believe." An hour later, I found myself sitting across from her at a small coffee shop away from our neighborhood. Rebecca looked completely different from the confident woman who handed us the house keys. Her hands were shaking around her coffee cup, and she kept looking toward the window like she was worried someone might see her. "I'm sorry for bringing you into this," she said. I told her I needed answers. That was when she revealed she had forgotten one thing when she moved out. A camera. Not one inside the house, but one outside that was still connected to her old security system. At first, I thought she was going to tell me about a maintenance issue or something related to the property. But then Rebecca looked directly into my eyes and said, "Emily, I saw something after you moved in, something your husband never told you." My stomach tightened. "What did you see?" I asked. Rebecca took a deep breath. "I saw Daniel inside that house before you ever moved in." For a few seconds, I couldn't even respond. I just stared at Rebecca, waiting for her to explain. Waiting for her to laugh and tell me there had been some misunderstanding. Because the idea that Daniel had been inside our house before we bought it didn't make sense. "Are you sure it was him?" I asked. Rebecca nodded slowly. "I wouldn't have called you if I wasn't certain." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved carefully as she opened a folder filled with video clips. "I had cameras around the property for years," she explained. "They were mostly for security because I lived alone. After I moved out, I thought I disconnected everything. But one camera stayed active." She looked uncomfortable. "I didn't even know it was recording until I received an alert." My heart started beating faster. Rebecca pressed play. The first video showed the front of the house from several weeks earlier. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The cars came and went. Neighbors walked their dogs. Everything looked normal. Then a familiar vehicle appeared. Daniel's vehicle. I felt my entire body freeze. "That's impossible," I whispered. Rebecca didn't say anything. The video continued. Daniel walked toward the house and unlocked the front door. My hands went cold. He wasn't looking around like someone visiting a property for the first time. He moved like he already knew where everything was. He walked straight inside. I watched the screen without blinking, trying to convince myself there was another explanation. Maybe he had a reason. Maybe there was something innocent behind this. But then Rebecca played another clip. This time, Daniel wasn't alone. Someone else walked into the house with him. Someone I didn't recognize. I looked at Rebecca. "Who is that?" She hesitated before answering. "That's the person I was worried about." My mind was racing. I had spent years believing Daniel and I were completely honest with each other. We shared our dreams, our struggles, and our future plans. But now I was sitting across from a stranger, watching proof that my husband had a connection to our new home that he had never mentioned. Rebecca leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Emily, I don't know why Daniel hid this from you, but I think you deserve to know the truth before you move any further into that house." And for the first time since buying our dream home, I wondered if we had actually purchased a place full of memories, or a place full of secrets. I drove home that afternoon with my mind completely somewhere else. The same streets I had driven down happily just 1 week earlier suddenly looked different. The house that had once felt like a dream now felt like a question I couldn't answer. When I walked through the front door, Daniel immediately noticed something was wrong. "Emily, are you okay?" he asked. I looked at him and realized how strange the moment felt. This was the person I had trusted more than anyone. The person I planned to grow old with. But now I had a secret sitting between us. I didn't want to accuse him without hearing his side, so I started carefully. "Daniel, did you know Rebecca before we bought this house?" The second those words left my mouth, his expression changed. It was quick, almost impossible to notice. But I noticed. He looked away for a moment before answering. "Why are you asking that?" That question hurt more than anything, because instead of saying no, he asked why I was asking. I took out my phone and showed him the video Rebecca had given me. The color disappeared from his face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel sat down and rubbed his hands over his face. "I was going to tell you," he said. Those words made my chest tighten. "Tell me what?" I asked. He explained that he had known Rebecca before we purchased the house. Years earlier, he had helped her with a complicated business situation involving the property. When the house went up for sale, he secretly contacted her because he wanted to understand its history before making an offer. But that wasn't the only thing he hid. Daniel admitted he had visited the house before we moved in because he was helping Rebecca prepare certain documents and repairs. He said he didn't tell me because he thought it would create unnecessary stress during the buying process. But what he didn't understand was that the secret itself was the thing causing the damage. I looked at the man I loved and asked the only question that mattered. "What else have you kept from me?" After that conversation, Daniel and I spent the rest of the evening barely speaking. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like every wall was holding onto a story we didn't know. The next morning, Daniel finally said something I never expected. "Maybe it's time we stop guessing and find out everything." For the first time since Rebecca's call, I felt like we were on the same side again. We went through the house room by room, looking for anything unusual. At first, we found nothing. Just boxes, old paint marks, and the normal things people leave behind when they move. But then Daniel remembered something Rebecca had mentioned years earlier. A storage area behind the basement wall. The previous owner had told him it was sealed because of old construction work. We moved a few shelves and noticed something strange. There was a small door hidden behind them. My heart started racing. Daniel opened it slowly, and inside was a narrow room filled with old boxes, documents, and photographs. It felt like stepping into someone else's past. We carefully looked through everything. There were property records, old letters, and pictures of the house from years before we ever saw it. Then we found a folder with Rebecca's name on it. Inside were documents explaining why she had been so desperate to sell the house. There was a problem connected to the property that had been hidden for years. But the biggest surprise wasn't about the house. It was about Daniel. As I read through the papers, I realized he had known more about this situation than he admitted. He wasn't just protecting me from stress. He had been protecting a secret. And that was when I understood something painful. The house wasn't the only thing hiding something from me. My own husband was too. The next morning, I called Rebecca. I needed answers, but this time I didn't call her because I was afraid. I called because I finally understood that there were pieces of the story that neither Daniel nor I fully knew. When Rebecca answered, she sounded relieved to hear my voice. "I was hoping you would call," she said. I asked her why she waited until after we moved in to tell me everything. There was a long silence. Then she said something I never expected. "Because I needed to know you were safe before I got involved." Rebecca explained that she had been through something similar years earlier. She trusted someone who kept important information from her, and by the time she discovered the truth, the damage was already done. She didn't want me to experience the same thing. "I wasn't trying to ruin your marriage, Emily," she said. "I just didn't want you living inside a situation you didn't understand." For the first time, I realized Rebecca wasn't the person trying to create problems. She was the person who noticed them. Later that evening, Daniel and I sat down and had the conversation we should have had before buying the house. He apologized. Not the kind of apology where someone explains why they were right. A real apology. He admitted that he thought hiding the truth would protect our happiness, but he finally understood that honesty mattered more than avoiding conflict. The house had revealed secrets we never expected to find, but it also forced us to rebuild something even more important: trust. Looking back now, I realize the house was never really the problem. The walls, the rooms, and the hidden documents were just pieces of a bigger lesson. For years, I thought buying our first home would prove that we had finally built the perfect life. But I learned that a beautiful house means nothing if the people inside it cannot be completely honest with each other. That phone call from Rebecca scared me. It made me question everything I believed about my husband and the future we were building. But sometimes the truth hurts because it is forcing you to look at something you need to fix. Daniel and I didn't become stronger because we avoided the problem. We became stronger because we faced it together. I also learned something about strangers. Sometimes the person who warns you is not trying to destroy your happiness. Sometimes they are the person brave enough to protect it. A home is not created by expensive furniture or perfect decorations. A home is created by trust, honesty, and the people who choose to stand beside you when things become difficult. And after everything that happened, I finally understood that the strongest foundation any relationship can have is the truth.